Victims of narcissistic abuse react to the abusive behavior they experience in one of 4 trauma responses, and those are fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Now, most of us are familiar with the fight or flight response. The fight response could be actually physically fighting back against a threat or against abuse. It could also be verbally fighting back, such as sticking up for yourself and standing your ground. The flight response is one of our more animalistic responses to danger or to perceived danger. When we cannot fight back, or when fighting back feels like a threat to our very survival, we flee. We run to escape the danger and to avoid the threat. Think of a rabbit. They aren't equipped to fight back against predators. Their best defense is their speed, their ability to move quickly. The freeze response to threats or danger is like the deer in the headlights response. Freezing is a sign that the brain cannot, in that moment, process what is happening and basically goes into shock until it can decide what to do next. In the moment, doing nothing feels like the safest thing to do. The fawn response is one that you don't hear about as often, and this involves trying to placate or appease, to submit to the demands of the threat or to the demands of the abuser in order to avoid being hurt or to avoid being hurt more. Fawning is used to avoid pain, and by submitting, the victim hopes to avoid pain or to at least lessen it. It's a preemptive attempt to pacify the abuser to avoid or lessen the abuse. If the fawn response is your go-to in a response to a conflict or aggression, you're going to be especially attractive to narcissists. They love this response because it gives them what they want, which is a feeling of being powerful and in control. They can also sense your fear and your apprehension, and this fuels them and makes them feel even more powerful. The victim ignores their own thoughts, their own feelings, and their emotions by just agreeing with whatever the abuser says or whatever they demand in order to prevent the abuse. This people-pleasing response creates a vicious cycle with the narcissist, who's going to demand more and more compliance from their victim. While the victim feels greater levels of anger, guilt, grief, despair, and even self-loathing as they give their all, both emotionally and physically, to the narcissist, because no matter how much the victim acquiesces to the demands of the abuser, the abuse cycle continues. The harder the victim attempts to keep the narcissist happy, the more abuse the narcissist gets away with, the more they're going to dish out to their victim. So if this is a defense mechanism that you recognize in yourself, you already know it doesn't work because the abuse still happens. For me, fawning was my go-to response. I hated conflict, and I'd avoid it whenever possible. Now, I didn't recognize it as a trauma response. I was largely unaware that I was even doing it. I didn't know I was people-pleasing. All I knew is I wanted to have a peaceful, calm home environment, and I was more concerned with that peace than in being right. Narcissists are more concerned with being right, no matter what. So when the ex-narc screamed at me for more than 6 hours after I returned home from a trip, I begged and I pleaded for him to stop, to just stop it. I agreed with everything, but he didn't stop until he was done with his rage. Yeah, 6 hours. Yeah. When he screamed at me over the phone for 3 hours straight, again, I begged and I pleaded for him to stop. I agreed to every demand he made. I said yes to everything. But it didn't stop until he decided to stop. You see, I believed I could kill him with kindness, that if I kept quiet, if I agreed with whatever he said and just continued to be loving towards him, that eventually he'd feel bad about the way he was treating me and stop it. It never happened. It never worked. None of these responses will really work with a narcissist, except perhaps flight, which is what I finally did. I just left. And that ended the abusive dynamic I was living in. We all have the potential to respond to traumatic events with any one of these 4 responses. Now, the first 3, fight, flight, and freeze, are innate responses. We're basically born with that. They're instinctual, and the responses that we end up choosing are largely determined by our own personalities. The fawn response, likely developed in childhood. If you found yourself employing this response in the relationship with a narcissist, you've more than likely used this response throughout your life. If you have weak boundaries, you probably respond to conflict by fawning. This is a learned behavior, and the good news about that, it can be unlearned. Begin by saying no to people and remind yourself it's okay to say no. Set up firm boundaries of what you will and what you will not accept and enforce them. Stop people pleasing. You can't please everyone anyway, no matter how hard you try. So please yourself and don't feel guilty about it. If you would like to chat with me personally on this and use my help, you can email me and set up an appointment. Fawning and people pleasing is something you need to recognize in yourself and then take steps to stop doing it. Because even if you're away from the narcissist and you're out of the toxic relationship, if this is still your go-to response to conflict, you could very well end up in another abusive relationship. And one abusive relationship is more than enough. Thank you so much for listening, and may your day be blessed.